read a story about a boy who, after Sunday school class, his mother asked what he learned. And he said, well, I learned that Moses led the people out of captivity in Egypt. And then they built these huge barges that they walked over the Red Sea. And when they got to the other side, he radioed an airplane, and the airplane came and bombed the bridges so the Egyptians couldn't get them, and the people were free. And the mother said, I don't quite think that's how the story worked out. And the boy said, well, I know, but if I told you what my teacher said, you wouldn't believe me. The story of the Exodus, in some ways, is quite unbelievable. The great miracles that God did to set the people free from captivity into freedom headed towards the promised land. Maybe it's unbelievable, but I believe it, and you believe it. And a big part of this story then is the receiving of the 10 Commandments. As soon as they got to the other side of the Red Sea, it wasn't long until Moses went up and received the 10 Commandments on the top of Mount Sinai. He came back down, and then you remember the story of the golden calf. We talked about that at length this summer. And Moses threw down the 2 tablets and broke them and got things sorted out. And then we read, the Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I'll write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning, and then come up on Mount Sinai, present yourself to me there on top of the mountain. And so Moses went up. He got the second version that was just the same of the 10 Commandments, and chiseled in stone, he brought them back down. No other part of the law of God was chiseled in stone. Why were these 10 Commandments so important to be chiseled in stone that Moses brought down from on high, from God's own hand, for the people? Why are the 10 Commandments so important? I'm sorry, Carol? Yes, that lasts a long time. So that's the chiseled in stone part. You know, that was the most secure thing that they had to make something last and last back then. It was chiseled into stone to last a long, long time. Why else? Why else was the 10 Commandments given? And never to be changed, yeah. You don't go in and re-chisel it. You can't fill in the holes and then chisel something new back in. No, this is it. For all time, chiseled in stone.
Laid out the moral responsibilities of man toward God and man toward man.
Yeah, laid out moral responsibilities and all sorts of stuff between man and people. Yes, you're exactly right. And why is that so important, to lay down that moral foundation? Why was that so important for the Hebrew people at that time? Keep their eyes on God. And where did they come from? Egypt. And where were their eyes focused in Egypt? Yeah, the Egyptians, yeah. I mean, for 400 years, the Hebrew people were enslaved. And in that 400 years, do you think some of them gave up on their God and started looking towards the Egyptian gods? I mean, it probably seemed to them that the Egyptian gods were more powerful because the Egyptians were in control. And how many of the Hebrew people became more and more like the Egyptians and treated each other like the Egyptians would and worshiped the multiple gods of the Egyptians? So after 400 years, now they're set free. Who are they going to be? What's the foundation of what their culture is going to become? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to God? There was nothing more important for them at that moment as they began anew than 10 commandments. And is it 10 suggestions? 10 opinions? 10 do this if you want to? No. These are commandments from on high, commandments of God. They're not optional. You are to fulfill them, and they became the foundation then of, well, not just the Hebrew people, but many different peoples all over the world the 10 Commandments. So I share that introduction with you today because I'm starting a 2-week series today talking about the 10 Commandments of the West Shore GMC. Whenever we started and we were new, some people got together and we talked about, well, who are we going to be? And we wrote down 10 commandments. And I was a little bit hesitant to call them commandments at first, but what else would you call them? You call them suggestions, things we want to accomplish, good ideas? Mission? Yeah. These come right from the Scriptures. They come right from the Scriptures, right from our experience. It was really who we want to be, the 10 Commandments of the West Shore GMC. And I thought now would be a good time to do a 2-week series on them. And these sermons are sort of lighter. I just pounded you over the head for 2 weeks with what it meant to be lost. They were pretty heavy sermons. And what's happening next? I'm talking about biblical hermeneutics for 3 weeks. I'll try my best to present it in those 3 weeks to make it relevant for our lives today and engaging. So pick 2 lighter Sundays, but just as important as well, because these 10 Commandments have become the foundation of who we are as a church. So let me share these 10 Commandments with you. And the first is this: thou shalt make disciples. Everything leads to our mission of making disciples. That's our first commandment. And I'm not going to preach again about this because I do it all the time. Talk about discipleship all the time. This is the great commission of Jesus to go and make disciples. Everything we do has to do with discipleship. Us growing as disciples and going and making other disciples as well of Jesus. It's all about discipleship. It's our mission, it's our purpose, it's what everything is about. The Great Commission, go and make disciples. And so that has to be who we are. If we focus on other things, we're going in the wrong direction. Read a story about a man who was in the jungle, and he was being led by a man with a machete cutting a path going forward. And, as the hours went by, the guy following the man with the machete was sweating and tired, and finally he had enough, and he said, "Do you have any idea where you're going? Do you know where the path is?" And the man replied, "I am the path." What is the path we follow? What is the path that Jesus is cutting for us? What is the path that is challenging to follow? What's the path? We may not know the next turn, but the one who is carving that path for us leads us on. It's the path of discipleship. And we follow the path maker, Jesus Christ. That's our purpose, is to make disciples for Jesus. Follow him, making disciples. The next commandment is thou shalt focus on small groups. Disciples are made in relationships. And this comes from, church study after church study. Where is the best place to make disciples? The best place to make disciples is in small groups. Now that might be surprising to you. You might think that discipleship best happens on Sunday morning. And Sunday morning is important, but it's more about worship. It's more about prayer. It's more about fellowship. It's about learning, but discipleship happens best in small groups. Why do you think that is? I'll put it out there. Why do you think discipleship happens best in small groups? Yes, Rob.
People are more apt to interject and to have opinions.
Yeah, people are more apt to interject, have opinions, be able to share, what's going on in their lives, receive encouragement and accountability, ask questions. There is a reason why I really push for interaction to happen on Sunday morning. And I think you'd maybe even feel free if you didn't understand something I'm saying. Mark would put up his hand and say, "Les, what in the world are you doing? I don't get it." I really am encouraging that in the midst of the sermon that I'm preaching, that interaction, because it does aid with growth. It does aid with discipleship. But that happens best in small groups, in that place where you feel safe and secure. You're not asking your question in front of the whole congregation, but with a group of people who you trust your heart with. That's where discipleship happens best. And that's the best place to invite people as well. Yeah, we got to invite people to church on Sunday morning, but when people come new to our small groups, they find that personal touch, that personal care. Church study after church study shows that the best place to make disciples is in small groups. And so the first and second commandments sort of go together as well. We're all about making disciples, and the best place that happens is in small groups. All right, let me say just a word about small groups. We do have a small group that happens after church. Everyone's certainly welcome to join. We do have an out to eat small group. We did have a discipleship path small group that we did last summer. It's something that we need to focus on and encourage more small groups and to get people to come together to share their hearts, to grow as disciples. So that's a good thing that the Ten Commandments do. They continue to push us. They continue to challenge us. They continue to be the level that we place on our church to see if we're a little bit out of balance. We need small groups. 3, thou shalt not replicate what the community does well. Instead, support it. As I was wrapping up my time in the Catawissa Parish at Mount Zion Church, we had a big yard sale. And people donated a lot of stuff. And it was from attics, from basements, from dumpsters. I don't know where they got it all. And I mean, the basement at Mount Zion was a huge basement, and it just got filled full of clothes and Christmas decorations and cookie cutters, you name it. Absolutely full. And so we had a yard sale, and we sold maybe like 2% of it. What do we do with the rest? Well, do we throw it out? Do we donate it? What do we do with it? And some people thought, well, down in Bloomsburg and in Danville, they have these places where people come in and just get things for free. And what a blessing that is. Why don't we start that in the basement of the church? We'll just say everything's free. People can come in and get whatever they want, and people can keep donating things. Sounds good, doesn't it? Now, Mount Zion, they were known for their missions breakfast. And everybody from Catawissa would come once a month to the mission breakfast. It was what we did. It was what we were known for. It was absolutely wonderful. And so we tried to connect the basement with what was happening with the mission, and it just went over like a lead balloon. And people kept giving stuff, and the people in charge wouldn't throw anything out. So it was like filling up more and more in the basement, and I don't know whatever they did with it, because I got called to come to Hope Church. But I just kicked myself again and again. Did I let that happen? Did I let that happen in the basement of the church, because it became such a drain on energy and time? And yes, the idea was great. Let's have people come in and get free stuff. Churches are tempted to do that all the time. Let's replicate something that's going well in the community so that we can bring people in, we can do it, and people will enjoy it and be blessed by it. What we want to do as a church, instead of replicating what the community does well, to support what's going on in the community, to go out in the community and be a part of the great clothing drives and the food banks and the things that are happening in the community. Don't try to replicate it ourselves, but instead go out and support what's happening in the community. Now that connects with the next commandment. Thou shalt be a simple church. Don't fill up the calendar. Have time for community. 1 Corinthians 9:23, Paul said, I've become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. That's a temptation for every church, really, not just for Paul and for people, is to become all things for all people. We want to have our own social agency and bring people in for clothes and food and support and counseling, and let's just bring people in. But then the church becomes, with a full calendar, a place of fellowship. This becomes a place of entertainment. It becomes a place of all sorts of food and festivals and so forth. Churches are really good at trying to do everything in our lives between the walls of the building. But the challenge is, where are new disciples going to be made? Yeah, outside of it. Where's the lost? Not in the church, but outside of the church. If a church does its whole social calendar, if everything you do is inside the church, you're not getting outside of the walls. You're not getting out into the community. You're not rubbing elbows with new people. Instead, it's just the country club that maybe opens its doors every now and then to invite people to come in. So the third and fourth commandment really go together. Be a simple church. Don't fill up the calendar. We want to have time to be in the community, and don't replicate the things the community always does well. Go out in the community and support it, participate in it. We don't want to do everything inside the four walls of the church because the lost are on the outside. People who are in need are on the outside. So structure a church from the very beginning that encourages us to go out into the world and make disciples for Christ. Does that make sense? You see that? And you'll hear that next week as well. And finally, thou shalt not be a pastor-centric church. Leaders share the load. Read a story about a church who the pastor had the hot air dryers installed in every bathroom as, a way to save on like all the waste that comes from paper towels and so forth. But after 2 weeks, the pastor had all of these hot air things tore out and thrown away. Well, some people on the board were questioning what happened, and they were upset. They'd spent a lot of money to put them into the bathrooms, and they asked the pastor at the board meeting why he tore out all of these hot air machines. And he said it was because someone put a sign on each and every one that said, for a sample of next week's sermon, press the button. So what makes that joke funny? It's true, isn't it? We as pastors, we're full of hot air. And man, whenever a church becomes pastor-centric, the pastor just puts out a lot of hot air, and a pastor can think that he can do everything or she can do everything, but we can't. There's some things that pastors should be good at, like preaching and teaching and shepherding and administration, but when pastors are put at the top of the church and all decisions have to run through the pastor and the pastor decides what kind of hand-drying stuff goes into the bathrooms, the pastor burns out, and you don't allow leaders to lead, and it holds a church back whenever a church becomes pastor-centric. We've got to allow leaders to lead. And look, pastors, okay, so maybe we can handle our home finances. I don't. Carla handles all the finances. Sometimes when Carla's struggling with the checkbook, I tell her, let me balance it. And I balance it on my head, and I walk around a little bit. That does not help her to find those 2 pennies. It makes her a little bit frustrated, but it makes me giggle anyhow, not her. Why in the world would you trust a pastor with a church's budget that can be over $1 million? Pastors don't know how to handle all that stuff. Why do you trust a pastor with getting bids for different construction projects around the church? What do pastors know about getting bids and sorting out different things to fix bathrooms and get dryers in it? What do pastors know about HR and hiring and firing? We're a lot of hot air. And if you'll let a pastor will pretend to know a bunch of stuff, but pastor-centric churches can only grow so far before the pastor burns out, and the church just never really advances. We don't want to be a pastor-centric church. Allow leaders to lead. Now, I must confess, as we got things started here at the West Shore, we were pretty pastor-centric. There was a lot of things that I did to get them up and get them going. But I also have enjoyed handing them over to people and enjoyed how people have stepped up and taken leadership of things. Like the whole coffee back there, I don't have anything to do with it but enjoy it. Thank you for taking charge of that, Simpsons and other people. Had it in the bulletin for weeks about someone helping out with tech. Right now I coordinate and organize it. And Brian, I thought I saw Brian here. No, I didn't see Brian. Brian King has stepped up and said, hey, I'll lead a group. And I know Kevin's going to help out with that as well. And that piece is taken off my plate. Last week I was talking with Lauren and Paula about music ministry. And they were saying to me, Les, what can we take off your plate? I'm like, yes, that's what we want to do. That's what you need to do. Don't make the pastor do everything or allow the pastor to do everything. You don't want a pastor-centric church. Let leaders lead, take stuff and run with it. That's what will make the West Shore GMC continue to thrive, continue to grow, and help me not to burn out or blow a bunch of hot air and drive the church into the ground. Thou shalt not be a pastor-centric church. Leaders share the load. And so that's the first of our 10 commandments, the first 5. And again, that becomes the level. How are we doing in these areas? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where do we need to grow? Where do we need to push forward on some of these things? These 10 commandments are things that we must do if we want the West Shore to continue to grow and continue to thrive. And next week, we will look at the next 5 commandments. Let us pray. Lord God, we do thank you for the West Shore GMC. We thank you that for over a year, we have been striving to fulfill these 10 commandments that have become the foundation of who we are as a church. Forgive us how we've faltered and failed, but ask you that you would give us strength, that you would encourage us, you would help leaders to lead. Lord, help us to fulfill these 10 commandments so that we might continue to grow and thrive as a church. And Lord, first and foremost is discipleship. Help us to continue to grow as disciples and to reach out and make disciples of all the world. Thank you for these challenges that you lay before us, Lord. Help us to more faithfully follow you now and forever. Amen. So what ways can we respond this day? Well, we can respond through the giving of our tithes and our offerings. I would encourage the ushers to come forward at this time.